Julia thought the worn silver necklace from her elderly neighbor was just a kind gesture from a lonely old woman. She treasured it for years, never knowing it held the key to her entire identity. When she finally decided to trace her family history, that simple piece of jewelry would unravel the most extraordinary secret. The woman who had watched her grow up from next door, who had given her countless small gifts and gentle smiles, wasn't just a neighbor. She was the mother everyone believed had died giving birth to Julia 25 years ago. Julia had always felt like something was missing from her life, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. She lived with her father, Marcus, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her father had raised her alone since she was born, always telling her that her mother, Alina, had died during childbirth due to complications that no one could have prevented. "She would have loved you more than life itself," Marcus would say whenever Julia asked about her mother. "Every time I look at you, I see her eyes, her smile. You're the most beautiful part of her that stayed with me." But there were always gaps in the story that troubled Julia. No photos of her mother during pregnancy, no hospital records, no grave to visit. Marcus would grow uncomfortable whenever she pressed for details, claiming the memories were too painful to revisit. The one constant in Julia's life, aside from her father, was Mrs. Rose, the gentle elderly woman who lived in the small cottage next door. For as long as Julia could remember, Mrs. Rose had been there with warm cookies, bandages for scraped knees, and a listening ear whenever Julia needed to talk. She was the closest thing to a grandmother Julia had ever known, though Mrs. Rose always maintained a slight distance, as if she was afraid of getting too close. On Julia's 18th birthday, Mrs. Rose appeared at their door with a small, wrapped box. Her hands trembled slightly as she presented it, and there were tears in her eyes that she quickly brushed away. "This is something special," Mrs. Rose said softly. "Something that's been waiting for the right moment to find its way to you." Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace with a small heart-shaped locket. The silver was tarnished with age, and the locket bore tiny scratches that spoke of years of being worn and cherished. It was inexpensive. Julia could tell that immediately, but something about it felt precious beyond measure. "It's beautiful," Julia whispered, genuinely moved by the gesture. "But Mrs. Rose, this looks like a family heirloom. You sure you want to give it to me?" Mrs. Rose's smile was mysterious and tinged with sadness. "One day, you'll understand why it belongs with you. Till then, just wear it, and know that you are more loved than you realize." For 7 years, Julia wore that necklace every single day. It became part of her identity, a connection to the kindness of the woman who had been like family to her. Mrs. Rose continued to be a quiet, steady presence in her life, always available with advice when Julia struggled in school, celebrating her college graduation with homemade cake, and offering comfort during difficult times. But Julia noticed strange things about Mrs. Rose over the years. The way she would sometimes stare at Julia with an expression of such longing that it almost seemed painful. How she always seemed to know exactly what Julia needed, even before Julia knew it herself. The way she would quickly change the subject whenever Julia mentioned wanting to learn more about her mother's side of the family. When Julia turned 25, she decided it was time to seriously investigate her family history. She had always felt incomplete without knowing her maternal roots, and modern DNA testing had made genealogical research easier than ever before. She signed up for multiple ancestry websites and submitted her DNA sample, hoping to finally fill in the missing pieces of her identity. While waiting for the results, Julia decided to do some traditional research. She searched through public records, old newspaper archives, and death certificates, looking for any trace of Alina Martinez, her mother's maiden name, according to her father. What she found was disturbing. There were no death certificates for anyone named Alina Martinez in their city during the year Julia was born. No hospital records of complications during childbirth, no obituaries. It was as if Alina Martinez had never existed at all. When Julia confronted her father with these findings, Marcus became visibly distressed. His hands shook as he fumbled for explanations that didn't quite make sense. "Record keeping wasn't perfect back then," he said weakly. "Maybe the documents were lost or filed incorrectly." But Julia could see the truth in her father's eyes. He was lying, and he was terrified of being caught. The breakthrough came when Julia's DNA results arrived. According to the genetic analysis, she had a close maternal match, someone who shared enough DNA to be a parent or child. The match was connected to a user profile with no photo and minimal information. But it included a location, the same city where Julia lived. Heart-pounding, Julia sent a message through the Ancestry website. I believe we may be related. I'm trying to learn about my mother's family. Would you be willing to share any information you might have? The response came back within hours, and it contained just one line. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll be sitting on the bench near the old oak tree. Bring the necklace. Julia's blood ran cold. How could this stranger possibly know about Mrs. Rose's necklace? At Riverside Park the next afternoon, Julia's world turned upside down. Sitting on the bench near the old oak tree was Mrs. Rose, looking older and more fragile than Julia had ever seen her. In her hands was a manila envelope thick with documents and photographs. "Hello, my darling daughter," Mrs. Rose said softly, tears already streaming down her face. Julia felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. What? What did you just say? Mrs. Rose, who was not Mrs. Rose at all, but Elena Martinez, began to tell a story that shattered everything Julia thought she knew about her life. 25 years ago, Elena had been young, unmarried, and pregnant in a conservative community where single motherhood was seen as shameful. Her own family had disowned her, and Marcus, who had been her boyfriend at the time, had initially wanted nothing to do with the baby. I made a choice that I've regretted every single day since, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. I faked my own death during childbirth and gave you to Marcus to raise. I thought you'd have a better life with a father who had family support, education, and prospects. I was just a scared 19-year-old with nowhere to turn. Lena had moved into the cottage next door under an assumed name, taking a job as a seamstress and living quietly, while watching her daughter grow up from a distance. She had been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. Close enough to love Julia, but far enough away to honor the choice she'd made. The necklace belonged to my mother. Your real grandmother, Elena continued, opening the locket to reveal a tiny photo of a woman who looked remarkably like Julia. I've been carrying it for 25 years, waiting for the right moment to give it back to the family it belongs to. The envelope contained everything: Julia's real birth certificate, photos of Elena during her pregnancy, letters Elena had written to Julia every year on her birthday, but never sent, and medical records proving that Elena Martinez was very much alive. Your father knows the truth, Elena said quietly. He's known all along that I was next door. We agreed that it was better for you to believe I was dead than to grow up knowing your mother was too ashamed to claim you. The confrontation with Marcus was heartbreaking for everyone involved. Through tears and 25 years of suppressed guilt, the truth finally came out. Marcus had initially been angry about the pregnancy, but had grown to love Julia more than his own life. Elena had been watching and helping from next door, contributing to Julia's upbringing in every way she could without revealing her identity. We thought we were protecting you, Marcus sobbed. We thought giving you a normal family story was better than explaining why your mother felt she had to disappear. Julia spent weeks processing the revelation that her entire life had been built on an elaborate deception created by two people who had loved her enough to sacrifice their own happiness for what they believed was hers. The woman who had bandaged her scraped knees was her mother. The bedtime stories, the birthday cakes, the gentle advice, all of it had come from a mother's love disguised as neighborly kindness. Elena moved back into her daughter's life gradually, and Julia learned that love had been there all along, just wearing a different face. The three of them, Julia, Elena, and Marcus, began the difficult but healing work of becoming a family for the first time in 25 years. Julia still wears the silver necklace every day, but now it carries new meaning. It's not just a kind gift from a neighbor. It's a symbol of a mother's love that was never truly absent, just hidden in plain sight. Every time she touches the locket, she remembers Elena's words. You are more loved than you realize. The simple gift had meant the world because it came from a world of love that Julia never knew existed. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the simplest packages, and sometimes the people who love us most are hiding in plain sight. Julia's story reminds us that love finds a way to express itself, even when circumstances force it into shadows. The necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise that true love never abandons us, even when it has to love us from a distance. If this story made you think about the hidden acts of love that surround us every day, subscribe for more stories that reveal the extraordinary connections hiding within ordinary moments. Share this with someone who believes in love's power to endure.